Hello, welcome to Life Matters. I'm your host, Brendan O'Connell. Well, we've got a couple of big votes this upcoming November in Massachusetts. One is the presidential race, but there's another very important item on the ballot called a ballot question called Death with Dignity. That's what the folks that wanted to get it passed called it, and the folks on the pro-life side call it doctor-prescribed suicide. We have today a special guest who went to Swarthmore College, perhaps our first Swarthmore College guest, and he also got a doctorate in theology at Boston College, right here in Boston. He hasn't moved too far from his doctorate home. He lives in the Brighton section of Boston with his beautiful wife and several beautiful children. Well, welcome, Dr. David Franks.
Thank you very much, Brendan. I'm very excited to be here.
Dr. Franks, the issue is so serious.
It is.
Can you tell our audience what is it all about this doctor-prescribed suicide or death with dignity bill?
It's absolutely crucial and that the residents of the Commonwealth understand the magnitude of the fight in front of us. Doctor-prescribed suicide has been basically bottled up in the Pacific Northwest for years now, though the advocates for this assisted suicide have been trying in other places. They picked a very favorable venue here in the Commonwealth because of the high cost of running ads, especially in a presidential election year, and so on, that these factors favor their cause. If they win here, it's like breaking the dam. It's going to sweep across the nation. So for those who care about the dignity of the most powerless, this really is a do or die kind of fight. So given the magnitude of the stakes, we must get clear on what's involved in this question. Death with Dignity is the name of the initiative petition, as you already said. Who could be against that? Dignity is a powerful word. It's something we all want to cherish and we want to see respected in every person. But of course, the reality of the thing, and this is why it's so important to be clear about words in politics, the reality is that this is a legalization of suicide. And then the question becomes, once we're clear about what's going on, what human good is going to be served by legalizing especially this form of suicide? The initiative petition would allow an adult resident of Massachusetts, said to be of sound mind, to request a lethal dose to be prescribed by his or her attending physician if that physician has in reasonable medical judgment determined that that person only has 6 months or less to live. So that's the bare bones, that in this case suicide would be legalized and would be facilitated by the doctor. Okay, there are many people actually who are with us on many issues that may not see why this is so dangerous.
And why is it dangerous?
The basic question, and it's a basic question in the pro-life movement, is what do we owe the most powerless people in our society? We see that in the most powerless human life, the unborn in the womb, and that's in a way easier to see once you've had your eyes open to basic facts of embryology and so on. It's harder to see, I think sometimes, given how difficult life can get, especially as we approach death, that it's the same issue, that we're talking about people who need our support to the end, and that the requirements of solidarity are precisely that we not leave them alone, that we not abandon them to their darkness and to their pain. So that's what's at stake. Is it in any pro-life issue? Is what are the bounds of our commitment, our responsibility for the person who's suffering? Well, there are no limits. We have to get in there and help. By legalizing suicide in this case, we're saying to them, look, you've got this option. Okay, and we'll call it death with dignity, and so you can, we'll say that we all feel good about this, that this, but of course what's going on is that we haven't stood by them long enough to the very end, and then are instead saying, look, here's an early exit you can take. Now, I want to get further into those questions, but I want to indicate certain things about the actual initiative petition that even if you thought in principle that this death with dignity, that this concept of legalizing suicide in this case is a good idea, why you wouldn't want to support this petition. That is, I think anybody who's actually thought about the issue, 100% of people should vote against this. One of the most problematic provisions is this, that there is no requirement to make a formal assessment of whether the person is depressed.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's serious stuff, because medically that's quite relevant as far as why is this person asking to commit suicide. If we had a teenager asking to commit suicide, we would go into high gear to intervene and get help for that teenager as well we should. Why is it that we, in this case, as a person is nearing death, we think, and that's another aspect, is how accurate are people, our doctors in their diagnoses of the amount of time we have left. But that aside, let's say this person is within 6 months of death. Why is it okay that we say, okay, you can go ahead and take your life? Well, we've made a judgment about their quality of life. But if we want to do serious medicine, you have to determine, is depression at stake? Is it involved? And that's not there. The really big problem, though, with this, the law as it is written, is this. What's going to be written on the death certificate is the underlying disease. Of course, that's already a problem because there's a lie being put in a public document, because we all know that the point is that the person is dying by means of a lethal dose prescribed by a physician. So there's already the problem of a society sanctioning a public lie like this.
So that would be a cover-up then. It wouldn't be, you would not see a doctor prescribed suicide on the death certificate. You would see maybe cancer or paralysis.
Precisely.
Or something of
Let's
that
say
nature.
bone cancer. Even though under the provisions of the law, we know that, of course, there was a lethal dose given, or we think we know. Here's the other problem. Because the law only will recognize the underlying disease as the cause of death, the law then forswears any responsibility to look into the actual manner in which the person dies. Under this provision, under this law, you get to ask, either you or a proxy gets to request this, gets to go up and pick up this prescription of lethal medicine. From then on, we have no tracing this medicine, this poison, actually. Well, that's a problem, for one thing. Where is this going to be kept? How is it? When will it be ingested? When will it be? When will the person? In what state will that person who's requested this course of action be when he or she actually says, "Okay, now it's time"? Because conceivably, and the law would have no reason to see one way or another, because the law says I don't have responsibility in this matter anymore once the thing has been prescribed. Maybe the person has cold feet about killing himself or herself, but maybe there's an heir who doesn't have cold feet about this.
Someone who's going to inherit his estate,
Exactly.
his or her estate, and maybe
Now,
get a lot of money.
Precisely. We don't think that this is something that's all that common, that people want to see loved ones die to get inheritance, but to think that that never happens, well, that's not realistic. It's not realistic. So we have, if law is there to protect the powerless, then where is the protection of the powerless in this case? The other thing is, what if the drug doesn't actually do its job? It's possible that it's not ingested in the right amounts, in the right time frame, and so on. There's a lot of drugs you got to get into the system all at once. Well, what if the person who are trying to help out say, well, let's put a bag over your head and finish the job? Well, is that murder or not? I mean, we've moved from assisted suicide to actively ending a person's life. But the law, again, isn't going to look at any of this because the cause of death officially is bone cancer. This is a disaster. Even if you think death with dignity, so-called, is a good idea, this is not the way to do it, because you want, assuming that what's at stake is empowering the dying person to make decisions, then you want all those safeguards in place, accountability, to make sure that in fact this person is not being killed.
Mm-hmm. Now in Oregon, I've had on the lady up there that it was a 10-year review, and she said that more and more those safeguards go away. I think they were supposed to have two doctors prescribe it or overlook it, and it's kind of all gone away. And also, they have a much higher suicide rate now than the national average. And depression, she was telling me, is the leading cause of people wanting to have suicide.
Of course.
Which,
of course it is, yes.
And what about the pain aspect? A lot of times they say, oh, well, the person's in pain.
Well, other data from what you cite is correct from the Oregon Public Health Division. Other data that they've collected indicate that among the top 3 reasons for why those who've opted to go this route have gone this route, pain is not among them. It's fear of being a burden, and so on, quality of life. These are important considerations. We'll get into those, but pain is controllable. What we need to work on as a society is getting information where some doctors know more about pain management than others. Well, we need to work on seriously getting that information more widely circulated. And a caring and compassionate society has to do that. We need to do that. But I guarantee you that's not going to happen. The more this legalized suicide goes across the nation, that will happen less and less, because now you've got a legal option to take care of, supposedly, those who are depressed and those who are in the last stages of life, presumably. It's not going to be pain management. It's not going to be hospice care. It's not going to be palliative care. It's going to be, well, you can take this drug. Why don't we get on with this? And in fact, we've got these stories from the Oregon experience where a person who wants actually treatment for, say, the bone cancer and wants a drug that's expensive and wants, who's on Medicaid and wants the state to help provide some assistance in getting that. They've gotten letters back saying, well, we can't cover this, but what we will cover is your lethal dose. Now,
so is that medicine then? I mean,
well, that's the question.
If medicine is going to go the way of killing, is that really medicine?
This is precisely the deep issue involved here. If you legalize suicide and have doctors as the agents of this, you've changed the very nature of what medicine is about, because medicine has always been about restoring health. Death is not health. How can prescribed death then be medicine? But we're going to have this confusion more and more. And in an age in which we're trying to bend the cost curves, presumably, in medicine, well, the only way you do that is by rationing care. And obviously the way to do that in this case is, look, you've got an option. This is a legal option. And when something is in law, that's a way of saying society agrees with this. It gives approbation to this. And that's why we have to be very careful about what the laws say. Because the young grow up and they say, and this is why there's higher suicide, if the law says suicide is okay, at least in this case, what's wrong with suicide? Mm-hmm. What's wrong with suicide? Law is a teacher. All people who paid attention to politics know that. Martin Luther King Jr. said that all the time. He made that point in the civil rights movement. We need to all understand that law is a teacher. And what are we teaching when we say, all right, there's some people where we're not going to actually try to help to deal with the causes of suicidal thoughts, suicidal ideation. We're going to instead say, yeah, go ahead. We'll help you. We'll cover things up. We won't even look into what's going on at those last moments.
And with the great aging of our society, with fewer people around, the younger people are going to say, well, you had your time, it's now my time, and why do I need to pay for all your medical expenses? There's that incentive out there down the road, isn't there?
Those voices are in play. I don't know if the young as a whole aren't going to say that, but the problem is that we've gotten, in the political discourse, well, there's this kind of this sense that the responsibility is to step aside. Well, no. Why do we have money in a society? Why do we have wealth? Why do we have health care? It's not so that we can take care of the healthy people, it's to take care of the sick ones. So I think it's exactly backwards for us to say, well, look at all those medical resources that are being spent on the last few years of life, when people are descending into death. Well, that's where medical resources are supposed to be spent. If we have a society, and here's the big if, that cares about the powerless. If we have a society that is in solidarity with the weak. If. It's the big if, though. And that's the question we all face. Do we have lifestyles that say, yeah, why we have resources, material resources, is to take care of each other? Instead of, well, I'm going to make sure that I have all the conveniences in my life to feel good, at least when I'm standing tall and in the prime of life. Well, is that really what money is for? Is it not to be at least one means of communicating love? I think we're asking the wrong questions as a society, and I don't think, and I know this does not help. If this is passed in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, we are going to be so hobbled in being able to carry on this discourse about what to do with the question of scarce resources when it comes to health care. It's a serious question, but this is deforming the whole discourse, because why do we have health care? It's to take care of those who are ill, those who are suffering, those who are dying. That's why it exists.
And historically, some large percentage is spent in the last year or two or three of life.
Absolutely.
From a medical perspective. Now, in Germany, they started off with useless eaters back in the Hitlerian times, and perhaps before that. And then it became more of a slippery slope. Do you see, for instance, if Obamacare were to survive the Supreme Court decision, and we have national health care, do you see an acceleration? If this were to pass, do you see an acceleration of killing older people?
Well, we've already seen in the man that he placed in, that President Obama placed in charge of Medicaid and Medicare services, a fan of rationing. He's already signaled.
Medical rationing.
That is, that based on calculations of quality of life, what this life is worth, and this is where the Nazi analogy does come in, right? When do we start to make determinations about which life is worthy of living? I mean, that's the Nazi line, life unworthy of life. So, okay, we won't make it based on racial lines, hopefully, but we'll say, yeah, that guy can't walk around, so maybe we don't spend as many resources to deal with another illness that comes upon him. That woman, she's bedridden, she's got dementia. Why are we using all this money to keep her alive, dealing with pneumonia and things that come upon her? Well, we do it because we have, and this is not just a Catholic principle, it's just human love and solidarity. We have a preferential option for the poor and for the weak. It's really just backwards the way we've got it now. We think, how can we get more resources for the system? How can, as the president says, bend the cost curve? You hear that line, and you know. You're hearing rationing, and rationing is bad news for the weak. So we've got to stand up and say, look, we have to reorient our whole society. Instead of consumption and consumerism and self-gratification, which, you know, there's obviously a place for consumption. We can't survive without it. But the whole point of having the material prosperity that we enjoy as a nation, and thank God for it, is so we can be more powerful in supporting the weak. And we start talking in that vein, and in recalling Americans to what it is that we're about as a people, what the common good should be. That's the kind of discourse we need to talk. That's the context in which then we talk about, all right, how do we deal then with the fact of the lack of adequate insurance, the lack of adequate health care? How do we deal with this? And there are certain suggestions I would have. For instance, that Catholic hospitals, which have historically been, that is the largest non-governmental provider of health care for the indigent, for the poor, what we should be doing instead of a healthcare law that in fact is undermining the bottom line and causing us to sell off our hospital systems. In fact, say, look, under true principles of subsidiarity, the government should be subsidizing hospital systems that take care of the poor with no strings attached. That would be something I would suggest as a policy move, which would be a lot better, because then, as you know, Catholic hospitals, everybody who comes in the emergency room gets treated. They get treated.
Isn't that a national law, though, when you get treated in the emergency room?
I guess that's true. But this is something that, and this is actually part of the issue with the HHS mandate, is the whole point of Catholic Charities has always been, we treat everybody. We take all comers. We reach out, Catholic or not, we're out there and we're helping. And that's something that the government should encourage and support.
Well, with the recent sell-off of Catholic hospitals, if this particular thing were to pass, that would be very bad news, because it would all be a bottom line, profit and loss type of a situation.
That's exactly right. Once you take, especially, this isn't just, there are other hospital systems that have these true goals in mind, but the Catholic system is the most preeminent. You take Catholic hospitals out of the equation, you marginalize them, you make them unworkable, and the current healthcare law makes Catholic hospitals unworkable, partly because the Medicare payments are so undercut, by the way. So you make it unworkable. Then you've got, as you indicate, a conversation, and when we're looking at hospitals and how do we make them work, it's the bottom line. How do you free up beds? Well, you've got now one option, doctor-prescribed suicide, to help free things up. But
And
again,
I know they do that in the Netherlands. They free up beds that way.
well, the Netherlands, of course, is the preeminent disaster scenario that we've gone within a couple of decades from voluntary euthanasia, from this request for assisted suicide, to involuntary euthanasia. This is, and studies show that it is quite widespread and doctors will admit to it, which is another issue involved here. You want your doctor to have only one goal when he sees you, and that is to make you well, or to take care of the pain and suffering to the extent that he can. If you think the doctor is there, and one of the options in his mind is, how can I hasten death? You've changed the doctor-patient relationship, because who knows? Is the doctor working for my good, my health, my well-being, or is he looking at the bottom line? Because he sees how the system is going, it's bending the cost curve, and maybe this is what you have to do to get along.
Where does the other side get all their resources to try to jam it down during the expensive television and radio time during the political season? Where do they get their resources to try to beat the, well, I'll call it pro-life side?
Right.
Where does the pro-death side get most of their resources?
Well, this is the case on almost any issue you pick, right? Defending the unborn, defending those who are threatened with euthanasia, and one can go into other issues, defense of marriage and so on. Well, the fact is that those who are pro-life and pro-family, they give a lot of money away to charity, but they tend to live lives directed towards their families, and they tend to be larger families. Baby boomers, who are most threatened by this right now, right? They're the ones entering into retirement. The demographic imbalance is so great that all across the world the pressures are to see how can we move them along. There is a large tendency towards opinions that are not on the pro-life side. They have a lot of wealth. The ironic thing is we're fighting for them because we fight for everybody. We don't want to see a whole generation of people who have tended to fight us tooth and nail, and here's their turn to be defended by us, and we're going to do it. We're going to do it as emphatically as ever, because we don't want any human life to be subject to such arbitrary and ideological judgments as to their worth. In fact, as we believe it, that everybody matters. We really believe it.
Well, Dr. Franks, our time has come to an end, but how could folks find out more about this particular subject and get informed on the issue?
The committee that's been formed to deal with the initiative petition in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts has a website. It's called the Massachusetts Alliance Against Doctor-Prescribed Suicide. I apologize for the unwieldy name, but the website is nodoctorprescribeddeath.com. I'm chairman of the board of Mass Citizens for Life, which is the preeminent flagship grassroots pro-life organization in the Commonwealth. I urge everybody to get involved, to join if you haven't become a member, to get people to join, because the pro-life movement has an infrastructure, a ground game, and that is provided through Mass Citizens for Life. But we desperately need revitalization, and that's masscitizensforlife.org. And the Archdiocese of Boston has resources at suicide-is-always-a-tragedy.org, which are very, very fine, and they're doing workshops all across the Archdiocese.
Great. Well, terrific. Well, thank you so much for coming in on this rather inclement day, and we hope, folks, that you learned a lot about the issue today and to really give it some thought going forward, particularly as that November election approaches. Well, thanks for watching. I'm Brendan O'Connell, your friend for life.